At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Of all of the recent advances in science and medicine, the one that sounds most like it stepped right off the pages of a science fiction novel is the promise of stem cells to cure disease. They're the basic building blocks of the human anatomy, and they hold the tantalizing prospect that diseases like ALS, cancer, and AIDS could be cured. Stem cells could even unlock the mystery of aging and be the gateway to the fountain of youth. Are they the miracle cure? Is it an industry that's bringing out the new age snake oil salesman? Joining us is Paul Knopfler, a professor at UC Davis School of Medicine and the author of Stem Cells, An Insider's Guide.
Thank you for having me.
Paul, glad you're here. What are stem cells, Paul?
So as you said, stem cells are the part of our anatomy that actually grows us in the first place. So when we're developing in utero, all of us literally grow from a stem cell. It's kind of amazing. It's like a seed there. And then as we're adults, our stem cells are thought to reside in each of our tissues and keep them healthy and keep what we call homeostasis going. So if we lose some cells, we need to grow some more cells. And so if we lose too many cells, that's a bad thing. We can get disease. If we have too many cells, we can get something like cancer. And so stem cells are really exquisitely able to keep a balance and keep our tissues healthy and happy.
Is this the thing that we learned back in 7th grade science where we regenerate ourselves like every couple of years or something like that? Our cells replenish themselves? It
is mentioned, but it's really brief, and that's something I'm trying to change, is to try to get stem cells as part of the curriculum for kids so they can really understand how important stem cells are, because you know, they learn about red blood cells and white blood cells, but they don't learn that those come from stem cells, for example, or that in their own brains there are stem cells, you know, growing their brain, changing their brain. So it's something that excites kids when we tell them about it.
So why all the excitement about this particular field? What's the promise of stem cells?
There's enormous potential there, and I think that's what's got me excited as a scientist and the public excited, because stem cells are really the basis for a new kind of medicine, actually, because if you think about it, for thousands of years, medicine has really just been, you know, cutting or herbal remedies or pills now that we take. And so with stem cells, it's a whole new idea. We'll treat a patient with cells, and they'll go in there and they'll help the patient. And so in theory, we could fix any part of your body with stem cells.
Now, they're not all, stem cells is a general term, but there are different types of stem cells, correct?
Correct, yeah. So there's stem cells, for example, in our kidney and in our liver, and those are what we call tissue-specific or adult stem cells. And they're more limited. They can just kind of fix the kidney or fix the liver, change into different kinds of cells in the liver. And then there's other kinds of cells that are more powerful, like embryonic stem cells. We call those pluripotent stem cells. And they, in theory, can make any kind of cell in our whole body.
Pluripotent.
Right, so there's this potency concept, power. And so pluripotent means it can do many things. And so, for example, pluripotent stem cells could make neurons in your brain, skin, bone, blood cells. The sky's the limit. Yeah.
It sounds like the Swiss Army knife of cells.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, they're the Swiss Army knife of cells, these pluripotent cells. And one of the challenges, though, is that those cells don't really exist naturally except during the earliest stages of development. And so if we want to get those, we need to either make embryonic stem cells or take normal cells that are not stem cells and change them into pluripotent stem cells, which is an exciting new area.
Paul, one of the things I've heard about intermittently over the years is people like holding on to the umbilical cords of their kids and things like that because they want to save the blood. Does this have anything to do with that?
Yeah, so the cells inside of umbilical cords, it turns out, have special powers, and so they're not pluripotent, we don't think, but they're not as limited as, say, the stem cells in your kidney or liver. They can do many different things, and so this seems like a relatively straightforward thing to do rather than throw away that umbilical cord blood, save it, you know, put it in a freezer in liquid nitrogen, and who knows, maybe years down the road, that child might need those cells, and they might say cure them of leukemia or something like that.
So these pluripotent cells, what is the promise that they might be able to deliver in the future, and how are they being used today?
So I can give you a good example of the use of pluripotent cells. There's a corporation that is trying to make cells that normally reside in our retina that are lost during the process of having macular degeneration, which is the most common cause of blindness. And so there are these particular cells that kind of live in the inside layer of our eye in the retina, and they go away when we have that disease. And this company's been able to make fresh, new, healthy versions of those cells from embryonic stem cells, and also from iPS cells, which are these reprogrammed pluripotent cells. And now they've already started a clinical trial injecting those cells back into the eyes of patients. And the hope there is literally to treat or cure blindness.
Have there been any results yet?
So far, so the clinical trials process is sort of a stepwise process, and the first step is just to try to look at safety, because we don't want to harm anyone with these stem cells as much as, they're very powerful and exciting. There's potential risks too, and so this company is just in the earliest phases where now they're trying to establish, is this safe? Because you can imagine if you're injecting into someone's eye some cells, you really want to be careful, make sure you're not going to do any harm. And so far it looks like it's safe. So now they're getting ready to kind of gear up and go to the next phase where they can see, does vision actually improve? There have been some sort of tantalizing hints in the safety studies that some of the patients might actually be seeing better too. So
really? It's
really exciting. It's still kind of early days, but already in clinical trials with people.
Well, and stem cells, you say that they're being injected in. One thing that I'm told is common is that some people look at stem cell therapy as being completely the same as taking a pill. But in fact, stem cells stay in your body. They don't pass through your system, correct?
Correct. So that's a big distinction between what we would think of as a traditional, like a pill you would take. If you have a side effect, you can stop taking that pill. Your body eliminates that chemical. But if someone injects you with 1 billion stem cells, those cells are alive. They can crawl around in your body. They can float around in your bloodstream. They can multiply, so you can have one cell become 1 million cells over a few weeks. And so that gives them part of their power. They can actually regrow part of our body that's diseased. But on the other hand, if they kind of go rogue, we can't really control them or just have them go away.
Well, haven't there in fact been horror stories about rogue cells that very strange things can happen if stem cells are mishandled?
That's right. Yeah, we had a story come out last year, I think it was, where, just for context, a big thing now is cosmetics cosmetic procedures using stem cells. And so there's a lot of dermatologists out there and plastic surgeons who are injecting stem cells into the faces of their patients to try to make them look younger. And so a physician apparently injected some stem cells into the face of a patient, including in her eye, kind of like around the eye, with the idea that it would make her look younger, maybe make the wrinkles go away. And instead of doing that, those cells made bone instead. And so when she blinked her eye, literally there was a clicking sound, because there's bone on bone in there. There's not supposed to be bone in your eyelid.
So a bone was growing out of her eye.
Right, and a bone was growing in her eye, and if it hadn't been caught, who knows? We were talking about before about stem cells helping vision. She might have lost her vision. And so this just illustrates with something that's really powerful, a powerful technology. There's potential for sort of a, harm coming from that power as well.
Well, and there has been, because there's been such an explosion of interest and activity, because stem cells provide hope that incurable things might be cured in the future, that there's a whole host of websites and offerings around the world offering stem cells for a price. And about a year ago, 60 Minutes did a story on this, but it appears that the stem cell research world, and no offense, is a little bit like the wild, wild west.
I think, unfortunately, that's a good analogy. Things are really a little bit crazy, to be frank, out there. There's so much positive stuff going on. There's so much hype and excitement that some people are kind of manipulating that situation to try to make money. And so on the one hand, we have people who are not really trained to treat certain diseases, they're literally injecting, they'll take a syringe with stem cells and just inject it into a patient, into their bloodstream or into part of their body, and tell the patient it'll fix almost anything that will ail you. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have really serious, dedicated people, scientists, researchers, you know, trying to use stem cells actually in a good way, in a positive way, following the rules, you know, following FDA guidelines. And so, and sometimes in the middle there's sort of a gray zone as well, and it's not always easy to tell, you know, who's on which side, you know, what's safe, what's effective, what's a little bit scarier. So it's, even for me, I follow this field really carefully, and there's this foggy gray zone sometimes where we really don't know is something good or bad.
Now, to try and address that for not only your colleagues in the field, but also the lay public, you have a blog that is extremely well read. What's it called?
So it's called ipscell.com, and that refers to this, you know, special type of stem cell that we can make in the lab that in some cases may substitute for embryonic stem cells.
And on that, you've talked about all kinds of things, but one of the things that I think is most interesting are kind of some of your observations about, given all of the information out there, and some of it's bad information, how to protect yourself. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, so one of my goals with this blog is to really reach out to the public and do educational outreach, because I do get contacted by the public quite often, and they may have misconceptions, and there's many myths out there. And many of them are looking for hope. They or a child or some other loved one has some condition that they really feel desperate, and so they're looking for facts and hope, and so that's one of the missions of my blog. And so I provide guidelines there, and also in this book I've written where I have a patient's Bill of Rights for stem cells. And really some of the key things are just common sense, like if something sounds too good to be true, it probably
typically is.
It typically is. Like if, you know, for all these years we've been trying to cure HIV, if someone tells you, you know, I can just give you a shot for $1,000 and I'm curing HIV, that sounds too good to be true. Or, you know, I can cure you of your dad of Alzheimer's, you know, with one shot. It just doesn't make sense. It sounds too good to be true. And also I recommend that people really ask a lot of questions of the person who's trying to sell you, for example, a stem cell treatment. And don't be passive, be active. You know, sometimes doctors are a little bit intimidating for patients, and so I really encourage patients who are considering this kind of thing, ask as many questions as you possibly can. Something doesn't feel right, don't do it. You can always, you know, wait and try again later. But once you get it, like we were talking earlier, once, you know, if someone injects living cells in your body, something goes wrong, it's really kind of late at that point.
Yeah, it's very difficult to unwind.
It is.
One of the interesting things that you cover in your book is the issue of where you get information. And I just want to read to you a passage from your book. And to set context, the lay public thinks of big journals, you know, medical journals, because we are doing our own research, and many of us are trying to be less passive than we would have been in the past in engaging with our physicians. And so medical journals would be something that we would read and think authoritative. But you say, I am not saying that published papers should be assumed to be entirely bad or wrong, but rather one should read papers with a critical eye because so many publications have flaws or overstate their case. Ironically, in my opinion, the more likely the paper is to come to, ironically, in my opinion, the higher the profile of the journal in which a given paper is published, the more likely the paper is to come to at least some wrong conclusions. It is only later or never that such conclusions are corrected. That blew my mind.
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive because you think of you know, a top-notch scientific or medical journal as being, intuitively, it should be the most reliable, the most rock solid. But what we've found is that a lot of times those journals are really interested in generating a lot of excitement. They can sometimes rush to publish findings. They're competing with each other. You know, they want to be the first one to break an exciting story, and so I think that sort of sense on their part that they need this, there's like a need for speed, you know, they kind of rush things, and, you know, they try to go for what we call like sexy science, something that gets people super excited. This often applies to stem cells. And so I think because of these reasons, sometimes we find those papers later on, we find they're wrong.
Well, actually, recently there was a big international focus because some folks in Japan, some researchers, said that they'd come up with like the perfect way to create, I guess, the pluripotent stem cells,
right,
which had never been done before, and now that's being walked backwards. Can you share a little bit of your thoughts on that situation?
Sure, yeah, so just again for context, pluripotent stem cells for a long time just meant embryonic stem cells. And then about 7 years ago, we had these new cells, iPS cells, that came on the scene that are also pluripotent, but we can make them, for example, in my lab over at UC Davis, just from skin cells or something like that. So that's very exciting. But there's some issues with those, like safety and stuff. And so these new papers came out just about 6 weeks ago, in which they claimed that they could make pluripotent stem cells by just dipping the cells in a weak acid solution, kind of like dilute vinegar or something like that. And so everyone was very excited. And these were in very prestigious journals, or a single prestigious journal. And so everyone was sort of amazed. This seemed too good to be true. And it's starting to feel kind of like now there's been an investigation that it might have been a little bit too good to be true.
Well, it's because no one's been able to replicate their results, right?
Right. So part of what was so exciting about their method is it made it sound like in just a few days you could make pluripotent stem cells. So you wouldn't need iPS cells, you wouldn't need this whole, ESL controversy to be invoked. It was just a simple thing, boom, you would get pluripotent stem cells from any patient. And now many labs around the world, some of the top labs that work on stem cells have tried this quote-unquote simple method, and it doesn't really seem to be working. Nobody has really gotten it to work.
And so in this case, that particular case kind of is the proof for your assertion in the book.
Well, I think it supports that idea that we need to be cautious when we see papers in sort of what we call the highest profile journals. Sometimes you have to step back, not let the excitement get you too, worked up, and really take a closer look at them. Again, use a critical eye. It's kind of like the patients talking with potential physicians who might want to give them stem cells. Don't always just instantly believe everything you read. Think about it carefully. And in this case, I think now even some of the authors are asking to retract their paper, which means they're probably going to take the paper back and maybe work on it some more, iron out some of the kinks, and maybe this method will work, this acid method of making stem cells.
Incidentally, embryonic stem cells used to be the big controversy.
Right, yeah.
What's the status of that controversy? Because we don't hear much about it anymore.
So it's calmed down a bit because, in part because there was a court case in which some people were challenging federal funding by NIH of embryonic stem cell research, and it worked its way up the court system in the federal courts. And ultimately, the final decision was ruled in favor of funding of embryonic stem cell research. And so the opponents of embryonic stem cell research really felt that that was a major blow. And so far, it seems like it's not going to go to the Supreme Court for an appeal. That's sort of the last recourse they have. And so I think that's kind of calmed things down, and things are a little bit more stable in that area. Certainly there's room for debate there still. But it seems like that's less controversial now, and what's more controversial is, how are we going to get stem cells to help patients? How fast can we do that? How should we regulate clinics? That seems like that's the new debate.
Let's talk about that. What people want to know is, if I have a loved one who is afflicted with ALS or has a history of Alzheimer's in their family, when are we going to get to the cures? What does the horizon look like?
It depends a lot on the disease, I think. And so for something like Alzheimer's, it's a very challenging disease. We really don't know the cause very much, to be honest. I wish we could say we knew exactly why.
Well, tell us which ones are the most promising.
So the most promising, I mentioned vision is a very promising one. There's already clinical trials going there. And I think diabetes is another really serious problem where stem cells could actually be a solution in the next, say, 5 to 10 years.
Really?
There's an intense amount of research going on. Yeah, there's some companies and researchers at universities now trying to make essentially laboratory-grown pancreases, and these would be implanted in the body because for many diabetics, their pancreas just isn't working properly. And the idea is that these stem cell grown pancreases could take the place of the one that we have that's not working.
Will stem cells ultimately, are they theorized to be able to create hands, feet, parts, things?
Yes, so that's another exciting area, is this idea we might be able to replace entire organs or digits, limbs with stem cell-based biotechnology. Bioengineering is really exciting. There are labs now using 3D printers to take stem cells, differentiate them, say, into liver cells, and then literally print a liver. It's still in its infancy, and that may take 10 or 20 years, but people who are otherwise pretty sober, calm people are really excited about that technology.
What about, well, one thing that the public is excited about is stem cells are being touted as potentially the fountain of youth. Where's the facts at with regards to stem cells being able to turn back the clock of time on all of us?
That's a great question, and I think there is a lot of excitement about this idea that stem cells and aging may be linked together. And I actually believe that stem cells do play a role in our natural aging process, and that's one of the ideas I propose in my book, is that as we get older, so our age goes up, our number of stem cells goes down. So in each of our organs, we're less able to maintain that healthy state of the organ, the homeostasis I was talking about earlier. And so I think stem cells do play a role in our natural aging.
But is it as simple as just injecting stem cells and I get younger?
No, so that's actually a pretty, unfortunately, I wish it was that simple, but that's actually a fairly common treatment around the world. Being sold for an anti-aging effect is you take either human cells or even sometimes scarily animal cells, animal stem cells, inject them IV, and the supposed benefit is it will make you younger. There's really no evidence that that's true.
And because they stay in your body, they could, all kinds of things could
There are
happen.
risks. You could end up getting cancer from them. Actually, a big potential risk is pulmonary embolism, because it turns out if you inject cells into your bloodstream, your lungs' natural tendency is just to filter them out and kill those cells, but during that process you can get a clot in your lung. So there's really serious risks.
So years ago, California passed an initiative to raise billions of dollars that created the Center for Regenerative Medicine, or a CIRM.
CIRM,
okay. And has the public got its value out of that multi-billion-dollar investment? I'm just curious.
I think so. And I should say I'm not entirely unbiased, because I've actually received funding from CIRM for some of the work we're doing in my own lab to try to make stem cell therapies safer. So, I'm not entirely unbiased, but I do believe that CIRM has really had a tremendous benefit for California.
It's about to run out of money, I'm told,
right.
And that the founder is about to come back again.
Right. There's only, I think, about 3 years of funding left, and I think what they're hoping is to have another initiative to give another influx of funding, and in part that's because so much of the work that CIRM has supported so far is now just to the point where we're starting clinical trials where we can actually do in-human studies, where we can actually put cells generated from stem cells.
So in other words, you guys want to finish the job.
We're halfway. We're kind of halfway there. We have all this momentum going, and I feel like it would really be sort of an abrupt end to things if CIRM wasn't to continue.
So I want to come back to the whole thing with the charlatans and the snake oil salesmen and putting out these therapies. You say, though, in the book that there's a bit of a balance, because on the one hand, people could go out and get untested therapies, but on the other hand, the FDA, which most people believe has a very sclerotic process on approving therapies, it's about, what, 9-10 years to get from studies through clinical trials and approval, that there needs to be something on compassionate use. And in our final few moments, can you tell us about what you would suggest to the FDA so that people who are really desperately seeking therapy are able to get it in the face of the fact that their particular drug or therapy might still be in some phase of clinical trial?
Yeah, so I definitely support the FDA's mission that we want safe and effective therapies for patients, but on the other hand, there's literally millions of patients who don't have any options right now based on today's medicine, and so naturally they're looking for other options. And so I've proposed some things. I sometimes talk with the FDA off the record.
What would be your, in our final moments, what would be your proposal?
I think one thing is they need more openness. They really need a process whereby patients and researchers can sit down with them and have an open discussion, and patients' voices can be heard. And compassionate use is one important concept where patients who, say, have a fatal disease like ALS, maybe they're willing to tolerate a higher degree of risk, and so we can get stem cells to them faster.
All right, and we're going to have to leave it there.
All right.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guest, and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syfax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.